The story began with a bark so loud, it made the entire police station freeze. Officers instantly stepped back, fear flickering in their eyes. Because the German Shepherd sitting in the corner wasn't just any dog. He was known as the most aggressive canine in the entire city. His growls echoed through the precinct like a warning. Stay away. No handler could calm him. Every attempt had failed. Once the most loyal dog on the force, he had become unpredictable after losing his handler in a tragic operation. Since that day, no one dared to come close. He refused food, attacked anyone who approached, and growled at every human who passed. The officers had given him a single name, the Beast. But one afternoon, when everyone had already given up hope, a young boy with a wooden prosthetic arm walked straight toward the cage, smiling. The officers panicked and shouted, "Stop, kid! Don't go near that dog!" But the boy ignored every warning. He simply looked into the dog's eyes and whispered softly, "It's okay. You're not bad." And when that small wooden hand touched the aggressive dog, no one dared to move. What happened next left everyone speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm truly curious, where are you watching this story from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The first snow of December fell like ash outside Riverdale Precinct, slow and deliberate, each flake a quiet echo of something remembered. The night hummed with the thin buzz of fluorescent lights, a faint smell of metal and disinfectant drifting through the narrow corridors. Somewhere beyond the reinforced doors, a low growl rumbled, not loud, not threatening, but trembling, like a wounded heart caught between defiance and despair. It wasn't the sound of rage. It was the sound of memory refusing to die. Inside the K9 wing, the air was colder. The polished floor reflected a dull, sterile sheen, and every step left behind a hollow echo that vanished too quickly. The cages stood in two silent rows, each one housing shadows and breathing steel. But only one of them breathed like thunder. Behind the last gate, double-bolted, chain-secured, lay Max, a German Shepherd once hailed as the finest in the K9 Corps. His fur, once rich sable and black, had dulled to a lifeless gray-brown. His eyes, amber and glassy, flickered in the half-light like dying embers. He wasn't sleeping. He never really slept anymore. Each time he closed his eyes, the desert returned, the sun too bright, the sand too hot, the sound of gunfire cracking through the wind. Then the explosion, the screaming of men, and the voice he would never hear again. Raymond Cole's voice, his partner, his world. The humans who came after never said his name the same way. To them, he was just a story now, the war dog who'd gone wrong. They called him the Untouchable. They said he'd lost his mind after the blast, refused food, tore through steel mesh, nearly took off a handler's arm. Some whispered he'd gone rabid. Others said he was still waiting for his soldier. The officers stopped trying. They passed his cage with the careful quiet of men walking by a graveyard. Even the rookies, curious at first, learned to lower their eyes when they heard that low, guttural warning, a sound that told them they were trespassing on grief too old for comfort. Captain Reynolds stood at the end of the hall that evening, the faint lines of fatigue carving deep shadows around his eyes. He was in his late 50s, hair silvered by stress more than age, his uniform neat but weary. He had seen enough service to recognize when a creature had given up. Still, he stayed there longer than he meant to, hand resting on the folder tucked under his arm. Max, printed in black ink, now smudged from use. He looked at the cage, at the dog sitting silent in the dark, and for a long time said nothing. Then he exhaled, one of those breaths that sound like surrender, and muttered to himself, "He's not a threat. He's a memory that bites." He wasn't talking to anyone. But from behind the bars, Max lifted his head. In that moment, the door at the end of the corridor opened, and a figure stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, his coat dripping melted snow onto the communal floor. His movements were steady, deliberate. A man who had seen worse than storms. Mark Jensen, 45, former K-9 handler, veteran. The kind of man whose silence carried more weight than speeches. His hair, once dark, had turned iron gray at the temples. His eyes, a deep brown, carried the kind of calm that came only after surviving too much. The department called him when nothing else worked, when a dog was too broken or too wild. But even he hesitated when he saw the creature in that cage. Max didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, amber into brown, the air between them thick enough to feel. Mark set the file down on the desk. The sound of paper against metal seemed to ripple through the room. He knelt slowly, resting on one knee, his hand hovering near the floor. No words, no commands, just presence. He let the silence do the talking. Max's chest rose, then fell. His ears twitched once. The scar across his muzzle caught the light, an ugly seam of survival. His breath came out in short bursts, nostrils flaring as if he could smell something he had forgotten. For a fleeting second, Mark thought the dog recognized him, not as a man, but as a type of man, one who carried the same weight. The fluorescent lights above flickered, humming harder, then dimmed. The air pressed down, heavy with static. Somewhere outside, thunder grumbled across the frozen sky. Captain Reynolds spoke quietly from the doorway, his voice rough. "He's all that's left from that unit. 5 handlers tried. 2 got bitten. 1's still on medical leave. If he snaps again..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Mark didn't look back. He just whispered, half to himself. Sometimes they don't need control. They just need someone who remembers. The captain gave a slow nod and stepped away, leaving the 2 alone. Mark stayed still, eyes level with the cage. The low rumble from Max's throat grew louder, deeper, not quite a threat, not quite fear. It was a sound caught somewhere between wanting to trust and knowing better. The chain rattled as Max shifted his weight. His gaze sharpened, no longer drifting, locked now onto the man kneeling in front of him. His tail didn't move. Neither did Mark. Minutes passed like hours. The hum of lights filled the silence. Then something small, barely noticeable, changed. The growl broke, replaced by a low, uncertain whine. Mark's lips parted, almost imperceptibly. "Easy, Max." The name hung in the air like the echo of a prayer. Max froze, his pupils widened, ears angling forward. The sound of that name, spoken not as command, but remembrance, stirred something beneath the scarred armor of his mind. For the first time since the desert, his world didn't sound like war. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant this time, almost gentle. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, then steadied. Mark stayed there unmoving, as the seconds stretched thin, saw it then. The faintest tremor along the dog's shoulders, the quiet shift in his breath. Not peace, but something close enough to break your heart. He didn't reach for the latch. He didn't dare. He only watched, and in that silence, something invisible passed between them. Grief recognizing itself. The snow outside thickened against the glass. Inside, the precinct slept, unaware that something had changed in the quiet corner of the K9 wing. And for the first time in months, the beast behind the bars did not growl. Winter had a way of silencing the world, not cruelly, but completely. The air outside the Riverdale precinct was so sharp it seemed to slice through breath itself. The streets were empty, lined with brittle trees and the faint hum of wind scraping across frost-bitten glass. Inside the lobby, warmth felt borrowed, the kind that came from tired radiators and cheap coffee. When the front door opened, the wind followed a woman inside, lean, pale, her coat too thin for the season. She carried something heavier than the cold, a silence that had lived too long in her eyes. Emily Cole walked as if she'd learned to move quietly in a world that had already taken too much. Her hands were red from the cold, her posture straight out of habit, not confidence. In her grip was a small wooden box, polished but worn at the edges, tied with a simple strip of cloth. And walking half a step behind her was a boy, Samuel, 8 years old, small for his age, his skin almost translucent under the pale winter light, his cheeks touched by the faint blush of cold. He held the box with his left hand, the one made of flesh, while his right, carved from wood, hung stiffly at his side. The prosthetic was simple, shaped by someone who loved more than he could afford. His father's work. The same man whose name was engraved on the brass plate by the door of the K9 division, Sergeant Raymond Cole. They weren't here for ceremony, just a formality. To donate the medals, the folded flag, the pieces of a life once full of purpose. The kind of visit no one wants to make twice. The clerk at the desk looked up, offered the polite nod of someone who didn't know the right words to say. Emily smiled faintly, not with warmth, but with courtesy, and began to sign the papers. The boy's attention drifted almost immediately. He wasn't restless, only curious. The kind of curiosity that pulls children toward quiet places. Somewhere down the hall, a faint sound echoed, claws clicking against concrete, slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a distant clock. Samuel tilted his head, listening. His mother's pen scratched across paper. The officer cleared his throat, but the boy's eyes had already found the source of the sound, a narrow corridor leading deeper into the building, dimly lit, colder than the rest. He started walking. No one noticed at first. His small boots barely made a sound against the floor. He passed a row of doors, evidence rooms, storage closets, a bulletin board littered with faces and names that didn't smile. At the end of the hall, another sound. A low, rhythmic breathing, the soft clang of metal against metal. Behind the last set of bars, Max raised his head. The German shepherd's body was still, save for the subtle lift of his chest. The overhead light caught the streaks of silver in his fur, the scars across his muzzle, the deep amber of his eyes. He didn't growl. He only watched. Samuel froze. Not from fear, but something more difficult to name. Wonder. The kind that tightens the chest and widens the eyes. His breath left a small cloud on the cold air, and for a long, strange moment, the world seemed to stop between them. The boy took one cautious step forward, then another. His wooden arm swung stiffly at his side. Max's gaze followed every motion, sharp yet uncertain, as if caught between instinct and memory. The corridor was empty, silent except for the faint hum of lights above them. For a child, silence is rarely intimidating. It's a blank page, something to fill. So Samuel stopped at the edge of the cage and looked up at the great, scarred creature that everyone else feared. His blue eyes, clear, unflinching, met the dog's amber ones, and in that unspoken moment, something fragile passed between them. The boy didn't see the beast the others saw. He saw the loneliness, the waiting. The same thing he felt each night when he pressed his wooden hand against the empty space where his father should have been. Max's ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly, drawing in the faint scent of wool, cold air, and something else. Familiar, distant, impossible. His tail didn't move, but his breathing changed. Slow, steady. Then the soft echo of boots broke the stillness. Mark Jensen. He was halfway down the hall when he saw the open door and the small silhouette standing before the cage. "Hey!" His voice carried too sharply. The boy turned, startled, but didn't step away. Mark's heart jolted. He ran, his footsteps pounding through the corridor. But by the time he reached the final cage, it was already too late. Samuel had lifted his wooden arm and pressed it through the gap between the bars. Time slowed. Mark could almost feel the pulse in his throat, hear the rush of his own blood. The air thickened. Max's muscles tightened, his pupils flared. But then, no bark, no snap, no warning, just stillness. The dog's head tilted, his eyes fixed on the small wooden hand resting against the cold metal. A sound rose from his chest, not a growl, not quite a cry. A low, trembling whine, thin as breath through broken glass. Mark froze mid-stride. His instincts screamed to pull the child away, yet his body disobeyed. Something in the sound stopped him, something that didn't belong in fear. It belonged in sorrow. Samuel didn't move. His face softened, almost sad, as if he understood. His fingers brushed the air above the bars, close enough for the dog to smell his skin, the faint scent of wood polish and child's sweat. And then Max moved. Slowly, carefully, the dog lowered his head. His muzzle brushed the boy's hand. A light touch, hesitant, trembling. The chain around his neck clinked softly. The world around them seemed to exhale. Mark felt it in his chest. The shift, the unexplainable calm that followed. The light overhead flickered once, steadying. The faint hum of the building returned. The end of the corridor. Emily appeared, her eyes wide, breath catching in her throat. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The scene before her felt unreal, the monster everyone feared bowing his head to her child. No one moved. No one dared. In the stillness, the boy's voice came out barely above a whisper. Words too soft to echo, but heavy enough to stay. "It's okay." And as the snow fell heavier outside, the beast who'd forgotten how to feel remembered what trust used to sound like. That night, the precinct slept under a heavy blanket of snow, but inside the observation room, no one was ready to leave. The pale glow of a single monitor lit the faces of 3 officers huddled close, their breath fogging the glass as the footage replayed again and again. The soundless recording showed the impossible. The boy's small wooden hand reaching through the bars, and the dog, the untouchable beast they all feared, lowering his head as if bowing to something sacred. No bark, no violence, only stillness. The room smelled of burnt coffee and disbelief. Someone muttered, "He let the kid touch him." Another whispered, "Maybe it's a fluke." But no one looked away. Mark Jensen stood apart, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Frame by frame, he watched the same moment unfold. The trembling of the boy's sleeve, the glint of wood against steel, the faint movement of Max's chest as he breathed. To the others, it was an anomaly. To Mark, it was something else entirely. The boy's hand wasn't just touching a dog. It was reaching through time. The stillness in Max's eyes wasn't obedience. It was remembrance. When the lights flickered overhead, Mark's reflection stared back at him in the dark glass. Tired, lined, haunted by something he couldn't name. He turned and left without a word, the door closing softly behind him. The hallways were quiet now, the kind of quiet that amplifies thought. He walked past old photographs of handlers and their dogs, the gold plaques dulled with age, names, years, partners who never came home, each one another ghost in uniform. Down in the file room, dust hung in the air like fine smoke. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting long shadows over rows of metal cabinets. Mark's gloved hand traced along faded labels, K9 Division Archives 2013-2018. The drawer groaned when he pulled it open, exhaling a puff of cold air and old paper. Inside were photographs, reports, training logs, fragments of lives measured in missions and loss. He sifted through the files, careful, methodical, until one folder caught his eye. It was marked Cole R. The paper was brittle, the ink faded. Inside, a photograph. He held it up to the light. A man in desert fatigues, smiling, kneeling beside a young German shepherd, both framed by the harsh sun of some faraway place. Raymond Cole. His hand rested on the dog's neck, the gesture familiar, unguarded. And in the soldier's arms, a small boy, hair messy, cheeks round, eyes bright with innocence. The boy's tiny hand was clutching the dog's ear, grinning as if the whole world was safe. Samuel. Mark's breath caught. His hand tightened around the photograph, the edges crumpling slightly. It felt like the world had folded in on itself, the past bleeding quietly into the present. Max hadn't recognized a stranger. He'd remembered family. He sank into the nearest chair, the metal cold against his back. The hum of the lights seemed distant now, swallowed by the pulse in his ears. The thought landed heavy. All this time, the dog wasn't dangerous. He was grieving. He stayed there for a long while, eyes on the picture, tracing the faces as if memorizing proof that love once existed in this place. When he finally looked up, snow was drifting past the narrow basement window, slow and unhurried, each flake glowing faintly in the lamplight. The next morning came gray and brittle. The town still shivered under frost. Mark didn't mention what he'd found. Not to Captain Reynolds, not to anyone. He simply arrived early, coffee in hand, and waited in the corridor outside the K9 wing. At exactly 9, the lobby door creaked open. Emily Cole stepped in again, her scarf drawn tight against the cold. Samuel trailed behind, clutching a small paper bag that crinkled softly in his good hand. He didn't look toward the desk this time. He already knew the way. Mark followed them from a distance, saying nothing. The boys' steps echoed down the hall, soft, light, determined. When they reached the end, Max was already awake. He stood, his ears pricked forward, eyes alert, not hostile, expectant. Samuel stopped just outside the bars. He crouched slightly, the way children do when speaking to animals, and placed the bag on the floor. Mark could smell the faint sweetness of biscuits through the paper. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Max stepped forward, each movement deliberate, controlled. His nose brushed the bag, then the boy's sleeve. His breathing softened. Emily stood frozen near the door, one hand pressed to her mouth. She didn't dare interrupt. Mark leaned against the wall, arms folded, heart caught somewhere between relief and awe. He noticed the change immediately. The slope of Max's shoulders, no longer rigid. The tension in his jaw, easing. The dog's chest rose and fell in an even rhythm. Calm, almost human. Over the next few days, Samuel returned, once in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon after school. The boy spoke little, but his silence filled the room with something warmer than words. Max began to wait for him, pacing lightly before each visit. The officers who passed the wing noticed. Some smiled, some shook their heads. "Never thought I'd see that day," one said. "Maybe the kid's got magic." But Mark knew it wasn't magic. It was memory. On the third visit, he saw something that stopped him mid-step. As Samuel sat cross-legged on the floor, Max lay down on the other side of the bars. The boy reached through, brushing his wooden fingers lightly over the dog's paw. And then, almost imperceptibly, Max's tail moved. Just once. A small flick, hesitant but alive. Like a heartbeat rediscovering rhythm. Mark swallowed hard, pretending not to notice the sting behind his eyes. He turned away, letting them have their moment. Still, peace has a fragile heartbeat, and it rarely beats without someone doubting it. That evening, Captain Reynolds called him into his office. The captain's face was drawn, his tone measured. "You know the rules," he said quietly. "If that dog snaps again, he's done. I can't risk another officer." Mark didn't argue. He only nodded, the weight of understanding pressing heavy in his chest. Outside the window, the snow thickened, painting the world in white and silence. Inside, something rare, something almost miraculous, was taking root beneath the cold. The next morning, when the boy returned, Max was already waiting by the bars, head low, tail still. Samuel crouched, whispering something Mark couldn't hear. The air felt different, like the hush before a hymn. Through the soft hum of the lights, the boy's voice carried faintly. "He's not bad. He just remembers." And in that instant, Mark realized the truth. The line between beast and man isn't drawn by fear, but by memory. And this memory, against all odds, was learning how to breathe again. It began with the kind of thunder that rattled the bones of the building. Deep, rolling, ancient, as though the earth itself were mourning something long lost. The sky over Riverdale turned black by mid-afternoon, clouds stitched together with streaks of silver lightning that tore across the horizon like broken glass. Inside the precinct, lights flickered. Rain lashed against the windows, sharp and urgent. The dogs in the K9 wing grew restless, their claws clicking against the concrete floor like a dozen uneasy metronomes, keeping time for a coming chaos. When the first flash of lightning burst through the high windows, Max lifted his head. The air cracked open with the sound, and for a second, the world became the desert again. Endless light, endless heat, and the scream of a man calling his name. His body stiffened. The smell of dust and fire filled his mind. He could hear Raymond's breath over the roar of battle, feel the tug of the leash, the thunder of footsteps, and then the explosion. Always the explosion. His memory was a loop that never stopped burning. He began to pace, claws scraping against the floor, breath coming in jagged bursts. The officers shouted from the corridor, their voices half swallowed by the storm. Someone slammed the door shut, locking the wing. "Get the light stable!" another yelled, but the flicker only worsened. Each burst of light painted the walls white, each shadow falling sharper, crueler. Max barked, once, twice, louder, a sound caught between fury and fear. His body rammed against the bars. Metal screamed in protest. The chain that had held him for months trembled, groaned, and then, with a violent crack, the bolt tore clean from the frame. The noise echoed through the hall like a gunshot. The lights went out. By the time Mark Jensen reached the K9 wing, The emergency lights had turned everything red. Officers were shouting over the wind that blew through the open window at the end of the corridor. "He's gone," someone shouted. The cage door swung open on broken hinges, one lock still dangling, torn like a wound. Mark froze at the threshold, his breath visible in the cold air. The sound of rain pounded through the open frame. "Max," he whispered, not as a command, but as a plea. Only thunder answered. Across town, the storm pressed harder against the hills, turning the roads into rivers of mud and water. Emily Cole's old pickup crept along the narrow incline, windshield wipers thrashing uselessly. Headlights carved short tunnels through the rain, illuminating trees that swayed like shadows come alive. Samuel sat in the passenger seat, the dog tag dangling from his hand, glinting with every flash of lightning. His small fingers clutched the metal tight, as though holding on to his father's heartbeat. He didn't speak, but Emily could feel the tension beside her. That quiet alertness children have when something inside them recognizes danger before the adults do. "Almost home," she murmured, eyes fixed on the road. But Samuel wasn't looking ahead. His gaze had gone distant, drawn toward something outside the glass. The next bolt of lightning split the sky. For an instant, the world turned white. And there, in the middle of the road, stood a massive German shepherd. He was drenched, trembling, his fur slicked flat against his frame. Water streamed down his muzzle, and his eyes, wild, gleaming amber, locked onto the truck's lights like they were the only stars left in the storm. His chest heaved, his tail was still. Emily gasped, foot slamming on the brake. The tires skidded. The truck veered sideways, mud splashed high against the doors as the engine choked. For a moment, everything was motionless but the rain. Samuel stared through the windshield, breath fogging the glass. "It's him," he whispered. The wipers dragged across the window, revealing Max standing firm, unflinching. The rain fell harder now, bouncing off the hood, streaking the reflection of the boy's face across the dog's trembling body. Then Max barked, a single, sharp, commanding sound that cut through the storm like a flare in the dark. His head turned toward the forest beyond the road. Another bark. Then he stepped backward, eyes fixed on the boy. Emily's hands gripped the wheel. "No, no!" But Samuel was already moving. He unclipped his seatbelt, fingers fumbling with the latch, and before she could react, he pushed the door open. The wind howled in, tearing at his coat. His wooden hand clutched his father's tag tight enough to leave marks on his palm. "Samuel!" Emily's voice broke in the chaos, swallowed by thunder. She reached across the seat, but the boy was already gone, running into the blur of rain and headlights. For a moment, Max lingered at the edge of the road, waiting. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees, a streak of motion swallowed by shadow. The forest loomed ahead, black and endless. Branches swayed like arms in warning, the air thick with mist and the scent of wet pine. Samuel's boots splashed through puddles, his breath sharp and fast. He could barely see beyond a few feet, only the faint glint of Max's eyes guiding him deeper. The boy stumbled, got up, kept running, lightning flared again, a snapshot of two silhouettes against the storm, the small figure of a child and the ghost of a dog that had once followed a soldier into hell. Back on the road, Emily's cries vanished into the wind. The pickup's headlights shone weakly into the trees, catching only rain and emptiness. She stumbled out, calling their names until her voice cracked, the sound carried away by thunder. Somewhere beyond her reach, the forest swallowed the echoes whole. Mark arrived minutes later, his truck tires spinning in the mud. He'd followed the dispatch call, K9 breach, unit missing. But the moment he saw Emily's abandoned vehicle, he knew. The passenger door hung open, the seat empty. Only a small set of footprints led away from the road, half washed by rain. God, he breathed, flashlight trembling in his grip. Lightning flashed again, close this time, and the thunder answered with a roar so deep it seemed to shake the ground itself. Then, faint and distant through the downpour, came a sound that made his blood freeze. A scream, high, sharp, cut short. He turned toward the woods and ran. Rain had turned the hillside into something alive, shifting, breathing, unpredictable. The downpour came sideways now, sheets of silver beating against the earth until even the air felt like water. The forest no longer whispered, it screamed. Branches bent under the storm's fury, snapping with the sharpness of broken bones. Mud flowed in rivers between roots, and in the middle of it all, a small voice rose and fell against the roar. "Max!" The boy's cry was barely human in the chaos. High, trembling, swallowed by thunder. Samuel stumbled forward through the sludge, his small boots sinking deep, his hair plastered to his forehead, the dog tag around his neck clinking against his chest. His breath came in short bursts of steam, each one ripped away by the wind before it could become a prayer. The night felt endless, colorless, just the pale flash of lightning and the endless sound of rain. Then a bark, sharp, urgent. Samuel's head snapped toward the sound. Through the storm's haze, a shape emerged, low, steady, cutting through the rain like something carved from it. Max stood ahead, his fur soaked dark, chest heaving. His body was mud-streaked, bleeding from the shoulder where a branch had struck, but his eyes, those eyes, were steady, unblinking, alive. The boy tried to move toward him, but the ground beneath his feet trembled, softening, sliding. He froze, too late. Behind him, a sound like the world inhaling, and then the hillside gave way. The ground collapsed in a rush of mud and water. The trees groaned as roots tore free. The world tilted. For one suspended heartbeat, Samuel's small frame hung in midair, arms flailing, the glint of his wooden hand catching one last streak of lightning. Then he was gone, swallowed by the slide, buried beneath the chaos of earth and rain. Max lunged before the thought existed. His paws hit the mud hard, claws digging deep, muscles straining as he fought the pull of the collapsing slope. His body slammed into the ground, sliding with the current until his teeth found the boy's jacket, caught fabric, not flesh. He bit down, the taste of rain and dirt and fear filling his mouth. The slide dragged them both downward. Max dug in harder, his claws scraping rock, tearing at roots, every muscle trembling under the weight. Lightning flared above. Thunder cracked so close it shook the trees. The world had narrowed to one impossible thing. Hold on. The boy's cry broke through the storm, a small, desperate gasp. "Max!" The dog answered with a guttural sound, half growl, half promise. His body shook as the mud surged against him, the leash of memory wrapped tight around his heart. Another battlefield, another explosion, another man he hadn't been able to save. Not this time. The wooden arm caught on a branch, jerked, and then snapped. The prosthetic tore free from the boy's sleeve, spinning away into the flood. For a fraction of a second, it felt like losing him all over again. But Max refused to let go. His jaws locked harder, the sound muffled under the roar of rain. Inch by inch, he pulled back. His muscles screamed. blood mixed with water, flowing down his side. He didn't stop, couldn't stop. Above them, the sirens had begun to wail, distant at first, then closer. Red light flickered weakly through the storm. Mark Jensen's truck skidded to a halt at the edge of the forest, tires throwing mud in every direction. He stumbled out, flashlight slicing through the rain. Samuel, no answer, only the wind. Then he saw it, the faint movement at the base of the slope. The beam of light caught them both. The child crumpled in the mud, and the dog standing over him, shaking, bleeding, chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of something half alive, half spirit. The boy's small frame was pressed against the ground, his face pale under the rain, but his eyes were open, dazed, blinking up at the creature who refused to leave him. Mark froze. His boots sank into the mud as he took a step closer. His voice cracked. Dear God. Max turned his head slightly at the sound, ears twitching. His body trembled, but his stance never broke. The rain streamed down his face, washing the dirt from his wounds, streaking his fur in dark lines. He looked not like a beast, but a soldier. One who had fought through every order, every loss, and still refused to surrender. Mark knelt, pulling the boy gently into his arms. Samuel's body was cold but breathing. The dog tag on his chest gleamed faintly, catching the light from the sirens above. The metal was warm, alive. Samuel's fingers moved, weak, small. They reached for the only thing within reach, Max's muzzle. The dog lowered his head, letting the touch find him. The boy's hand rested against his face, trembling, slick with mud and blood. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. For a long moment, all sound seemed to fade. The rain, the sirens, even the wind. There was only the rhythm of two heartbeats, uneven but in sync, echoing against the hollow silence that follows survival. When the world returned, Mark found himself whispering, the words half thought, half confession. He didn't save a child. His voice broke, barely audible under the storm. He saved his family. And in the faint glow of the rescue lights, that truth hung in the air, simple, unadorned, and more powerful than any prayer. The rain fell softer now, like the sky itself had exhaled. The hillside had stopped moving. Max's body swayed once, then steadied. His eyes flickered toward the boy, then to the horizon, as if waiting for a voice that would never call again. Mark reached out, his hand resting briefly on the dog's back. It was warm, trembling beneath the rain, a heartbeat under a storm, a life that refused to give up. The sirens wailed again, closer this time. Men shouted. Lights cut through the darkness. But for one sacred instant, there were no rescuers, no ranks, no distance between man and animal, only the quiet understanding that loyalty, in its purest form, does not save lives. It redeems them. Weeks drifted by like slow-moving clouds after rain. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in the boy's dreams, where thunder still rolled behind closed eyes, and in the thin pink scars beneath the dog's fur, where the body remembered what the heart could not forget. The world had turned gentle again. In the small hospital room, morning light poured through gauzy curtains, catching the dust in golden motion. Machines hummed softly, steady, like a reminder that life insists on continuing even when no one asks it to. On the bed, Samuel lay propped against white pillows, the freckles on his face faint beneath the pale light. His small hand, the one still whole, rested gently on the head of the German shepherd beside him. Max's breathing was deep, rhythmic, his tail moving in slow, thoughtful motions. It wasn't excitement, It was something quieter, like a heartbeat relearning its purpose. Emily stood nearby, a shadow framed by sunlight, her eyes glistening in that delicate way tears do when they no longer come from pain, but from the strange relief of realizing what's been spared. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The warmth in her gaze said enough. Gratitude, love, and that fragile disbelief that miracles sometimes choose ordinary rooms to appear in. At the doorway, Mark Jensen leaned against the frame, hands buried in his coat pockets, his expression somewhere between awe and surrender. His voice was quiet when it finally broke the silence. He waited for him, he murmured, as if confessing it to the light itself, all this time. Outside, winter retreated. The snow melted off rooftops, off gravestones, off the rusted hinges of the old K9 wing. The air smelled of thawing earth, the scent of second chances. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and life, as it always does, began to stitch itself back together in ways no one truly noticed until much later. When winter came again, it returned softly, as if remembering its own mistakes. The precinct courtyard glowed under a pale sun, flakes drifting in slow spirals that looked less like weather and more like grace. Officers gathered in their dark coats, collars up, breath visible in the cold. The ceremony wasn't long, but everyone stood straighter that morning. Even the silence seemed to listen. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, the silver badge gleaming in his gloved hand. The man's voice, usually firm and commanding, carried a quiet tremor. He fastened the badge to the polished collar around Max's neck, a single motion that felt like both apology and honor. "For bravery beyond duty," he said, the words soft but steady, "and for loyalty that outlived war." Applause rose slowly, like the wings of a bird taking flight. Gentle, respectful. Snow landed on shoulders, melted against the warmth of skin. Samuel laughed, and the sound, bright, high, unbroken, cut through the air like the first bell of spring. He threw his arms around Max's neck, burying his face in the thick fur that smelled faintly of pine and clean snow. He whispered something only the dog could hear. The wind carried it away. For a moment, the world seemed perfectly balanced, as if every sorrow that had ever existed had been momentarily forgiven. Mark stood off to the side, his breath catching in the cold. Emily's hands were clasped over her heart. Max sat still at the middle of it all, head high, eyes soft, the silver badge shining where light met fur. That evening, as the sky deepened into twilight, the mountain air turned glassy and still. The courtyard was empty now, except for two figures sitting on the steps. The boy and the dog, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon where the sun sank behind snow-covered peaks. The air shimmered faintly with cold. A single line of clouds glowed gold and pink, fading into memory. Neither moved for a long time. The boy's small hand rested on Max's back, the rhythm of his breathing slow and steady. The dog exhaled, eyes half closed, content in the silence. Somewhere beyond that horizon, where the light disappeared, another man had once stood, watching the same sky, a soldier with the same eyes, the same quiet courage. The circle had closed. Mark watched from the doorway, arms folded, the cold biting gently at his cheeks. His voice came barely above a whisper, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the ghosts of all those who had ever waited for someone who never came home. "Some bonds never break," he said. "They just wait to be remembered." And when the first stars began to bloom over the valley, Samuel leaned closer to Max, his voice barely more than a breath. Welcome home. The world, for that moment, felt healed. Not perfect, not fixed, but mended in a way only love and loyalty can manage. Somewhere the snow continued to fall. Somewhere a light stayed on through the night. Because not every hero wears a uniform. Some simply stay and wait and love until the world remembers why it's worth saving. Sometimes, when the noise fades and the world goes still, we remember what truly matters. It isn't the medals or the stories written in bold letters. It's the quiet moments of loyalty no one sees. A hand reaching out. A heartbeat that refuses to give up. A soul that keeps waiting, even when hope seems gone. The brave don't always march beneath flags or stand beneath spotlights. Some walk on four legs, some live in silence, and some simply stay, faithful, unyielding, until love finds its way back to them. Maybe that's what courage really is, not the absence of fear, but the decision to stay kind in a world that sometimes forgets how. So tonight, as the stars rise over another sleeping town, let's remember them. The silent guardians, the unseen companions, the hearts that keep this world gentle. Not every hero wears a badge, and not every story makes the headlines. Here at Healing with Max, we keep their courage alive. Subscribe today so you'll never miss the next untold story of veterans and their Max partners.